Alright, hi everyone. So we're going to take a look at this is going to be a first drive log. So I've just opened the log in LiveLink and this is what you'll see. So we'll go through the first steps. If you haven't watched the idle log video, watch that one first. It'll give you a little bit of background about what we're going to do here. So what we want to do first is set our views appropriately. So we'll go up to this max button, expand the chart. Now we're looking at too much data because of all these data points are checked off. So let's uncheck it with this little weird pencil icon here. And let's look at ECT, engine coolant temps, which is actually, as you learned in the first video, cylinder head metal temps. So they'll always be a bit higher than coolant temps because it's the actual metal temperature of the head, which is more accurate. So you can see them come up, and then you can see them swinging up and down, and that's the thermostat opening and closing, and that's of course what we want to see. So here we see it peaking overall around 206, which is quite good, relatively low load driving. Coolant temps should never exceed 245. If they exceed 245, there's a problem in the system somewhere. So the cutoff is 245. You should never see them above that as the one number to keep in mind. That's the upper range. So let's move on and take a look at a few other things. So what I'd like to do in the drive logs is we'll take a look at, so this is TPV, this is throttle position. So you can see in this case Paul where his foot was at various points along here, and the range for throttle position is around 170 to 195, which are these numbers here at idle, all the way up to between 8 and 900 or so at wide open throttle. So you can see he's got some high throttle positions and then a mix of kind of mid-range stuff. So the next thing I'll look for in one of these logs is to make sure his vehicle speed sensor is working, and clearly we can see that it is. The vehicle speed sensor, it's not going to be completely accurate on the vehicle, and it doesn't need to be. The ECU just wants to know whether it's moving or not, and that's what it uses for strategy. So we know the VSS is working. We can then also look at, we want to make sure of course that he doesn't have any diagnostic trouble codes, and you can see that's at 0 and it doesn't change, so that's good. And then also you can see this is fuel source that I'm taking a look at here, and this coincides, as you can see, with throttle position. So if I toggle this on and off, you can see that in the high throttle positions it peaks to a fuel source of 5 is the value, and then at other times when he's at lower throttle positions or at idle here, it's a 0. And as I mentioned in the first video, 0 means that it's looking at feedback from the oxygen sensor to control fueling, and then at 5 it means it's in wide open throttle mode and it's in open loop, meaning the feedback loop is not closed, meaning it's not looking at the feedback from the oxygen sensor. It's ignoring that and just doing its thing based on calculation. This is useful when we look at the fuel trims, which is what we'll do next. So what we want to do is we want to look for patterns in the fuel trim that indicate that you might have a problem, or that Paul, in this case Paul, might have a problem. So one way is to look at the short-term fuel trims, which is what we discussed a little bit in the last one. You can see some variation here in the short-term fuel trims, but short-term fuel trim is just that. Short and long, in the case of short and long-term fuel trims, means time range. So in the short term, the short-term fuel trim eventually will get its corrections moved to the long-term fuel trim here. And so you can see from the beginning of the log there's not much going on here, and it slowly ramps up into this pattern, and it's learning throughout the course of this log. So what we'll do is it's best to look at, and this is what I usually do, is I'll turn everything off but the long-term fuel trim and the throttle position. And so what we want to do is you can look at the difference between the highest and the lowest points. So in this case we've got like a 0.92, which in the case of long-term fuel trim is under 1 means that it's removing fuel, and over 1 means it's adding fuel. And so the thing the red flags with long-term fuel trims is if you're adding too much fuel. We never want to be adding too much fuel, because that can indicate a fuel delivery problem if it's adding under load, and it can indicate a vacuum leak if it's having to add a bunch while you're not under load, and that's the pattern that'll emerge. But in this case, you can see that the high points here are really, there's 8% or so ever added, which is within range. As long as you're less than 10%, which would be 1.1 in this case, then you're fine. And as we can see here, again, this is throttle position, so kind of a medium throttle position. There's only 4 or 5% or so being added, and then at this higher throttle position here, there's absolutely no corrections being made, which is what we want. We can also look at the oxygen sensor and double check that everything is correctly operating. And so you can see here where you've got these plateaus where it doesn't do this swinging back and forth. These will be the areas where he's wide open throttle and the fuel is being commanded, and it goes richer than the perfect combustion point, because that's where you want a little more extra power. So emissions will be higher in these areas, but your power and torque is also higher, and that's where you're getting a little bit of extra fuel while you're demanding more power. And then in the kind of gentler cruise mode driving, you're getting feedback from the oxygen sensor so that you have the best emissions and fuel economy, and that's when we see these things swing back and forth. So everything's actually looking quite good here as far as Paul's driving log. The temperatures are under control, fuel trims are within range, vehicle speed sensor is working. Yeah, everything's looking good. And then let's take a look at his driving style. And this may just because he's let's see, the highest RPMs Paul gets to is 4398. So this is a mild drive. And so what I would suggest to Paul is go out on the next drive and really wind the puppy out. Really give it wide open, get it warmed up, give it wide open throttle, and don't shift until you cross 5,500 RPM. And then you'll really see what kind of power you've got there. And granted, you don't have to be there. Most Vanagon drivers aren't speed demons and need to be there very often, but it's there when you need it. And so that's what you want to know about and experience. So this log is looking quite good. And again, if you've got questions, submit a ticket or post a comment to our little thingy on the website, or shoot me an email, or give us a call. Thanks.